Don't let Washington war dogs wreck an Aussie family. And bail-in's agent Bond gets the boot. Coming up on today's Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report for the 19th of September 2024. I'm Elisa Barwick. Joining me today is Citizens Party Research Director Robert Barwick. Welcome, Robbie.
Thanks, Elisa.
And on today's show, we're going to be discussing the Dan Duggan case, the Top Gun pilot who the US is trying to make an example of. So very important.
We're witnessing a massive travesty of justice that should deeply concern every Australian.
And stay tuned for the second topic, because we're going to be talking about crisis management in the upcoming financial blowout, which APRA and others are preparing for, but they have been forced to scrap a key element of the bail-in program in Australia, which is rather interesting. Now, before we get into the first topic, there's a few updates, but don't forget, comment below, hit the like button, circulate the show on social media. All of those things will help get the word around, and we'll obviously be asking you to participate in certain campaigns, as we always do, which has a huge impact, and we've got great runs on the board, which we'll update you on in a moment. But to keep all that going, to fuel the whole fight, please do donate if you can, and we'll provide a link for that below. Now, on that good news, say something about the advance on the postal bank campaign, which we've been talking about in previous weeks, in terms of the article that came out in The Australian saying that a postal bank is back on the agenda. We have confirmed that this is indeed the case.
So we haven't got a postal bank yet, but what we saw in the headline in The Australian a couple of weeks ago that you've just said was evidence that we've won the argument. Right? We've got the government of the day looking and having discussions about implementing this policy. Since then, we've been trying to figure out, okay, what are they talking about? Who are they talking to? What are the discussions? What input can we have? I went to Canberra last week for a couple of days to talk to as many people as I can, both sides of politics. What do you know? Frankly, nobody knew anything. So I deployed them all, ask around.
Put the feelers out.
Put the feelers out, let me know what you find out. Very importantly, this week, a collaborator of ours had a meeting with a minister in the government, and that government minister confirmed to our collaborator firsthand that yes, the government has decided that this is what it's got to do. It's in discussions to do it. Very interestingly, the main predicate that this minister cited for the imperative to do it was actually the crisis in cash distribution. People might know about this. There's been all these crisis talks about Armaguard, and there's now basically the sole main cash distributor in Australia. Not quite true, but it's the sole big one. There are other smaller ones, and they should have a bigger role. And so there's been crisis talks with the banks and Australia Post, etc. So that's one of the reasons the government has figured out, look, this has got to be done, because despite all the utopianism from the banks about, we can go digital, this government has got the message from the Australian people that they would be crucified if they got rid of cash. And they also understand at a practical level, Australia, especially in the regions, cannot function without cash, right? So they've got that point. And of course, the other contributing factor was the crisis in regional bank services, etc. So it's definitely on. And our concern now, Elisa, is to make sure that they come up with the right kind of bank and not some token thing just to look like they're getting this agenda off their back. So you will see us talking in a lot more detail now about what we should be expecting from this bank, what it can do. We know the history of the Commonwealth Bank. You did a presentation last night to our Statecraft Academy about the history of public housing in Australia, and how the times when we were most successful was when we had public banks to fund our public housing authorities. And that's just one example of two issues that are both, again, really timely, right? And so we'll be giving people a sense of that sort of thing. So we have maximum input into the government's thinking. We can come up with something really good.
Yeah, and that is thanks to all of you guys, the viewers, and we'll be calling on you more, because what we're going to be countering is the neoliberal factor, where a lot of these politicians, just can't think in any other terms.
The private sector should do this. To quote Joe Hockey, around March 2009, when he was the Shadow Treasurer of Australia, and he was giving bloviating in some speech he was giving in Parliament, and he said, if there's one thing we've learned, Mr. Speaker, from the global financial crisis, is that government should not be involved in banking. And how on earth that fat tub of lard, dumb idiot, took that lesson away from the global financial crisis. And I'm going to call him that because he is, and now he's off warmongering, right? He's off cashing in on AUKUS, and he knows how to make money out of people's misery.
Yeah.
He's the guy that got rid of the car industry in Australia. That was his takeaway from the global financial crisis. Government should not be involved in banking. No, you dumb fat idiot. The proof is government should be involved in banking, set a standard of service and conduct, and that the private banks have to match and be able to do things with credit, because it is the government in terms of funding important areas of the economy on terms that a private bank wouldn't want to do because it's not profitable enough. The public bank can do that, and it's an incredibly powerful tool, and the private bankers don't hate it because it doesn't work, they hate it because it does work.
Yeah.
And that's why we've got to bring it back.
Now, talking about warmongers,
Yep.
we have a quick update on the war situation globally. There's a number of fronts of escalation and things are moving very fast, but this situates our first topic, which we'll get to very shortly. Israel, as people would have seen this in the news, has targeted Hezbollah figures across the board in Lebanon in the last couple of days. Exploding pages killed 12 people and injured 2,800, including children, doctors and nurses were injured. Walkie-talkies then, the following day, killed another at least 20 people and wounded more than 450. I mean, this is not... talk about...
This is not war, it's terrorism.
Exactly, it's terrorism. Talk about hybrid war. I mean, this is going even beyond that into the realms of terrorism, literally.
And we've been warning about this for a few months now. The Benjamin Netanyahu is a criminal. If he wasn't Prime Minister, he would be facing criminal charges and be in jail. While the war goes, as long as the war rages on, he can stay away from that. That's not the main issue, but that's certainly a factor for him. He is desperate to expand the war into a wider regional war and force the United States to come in, because he doesn't care if he blows up the world. This guy is one of the most evil men in the world. You can go back and watch him testifying to the US Congress in 2002, demanding they invade Iraq and promising that if they invade Iraq, that 1,000 flowers would bloom across the Middle East. It would solve all the problems. People like him should be in jail. Not just him, but people like him should be in jail for being the perpetrators of the war crime of the 21st century. Instead, he's now the Prime Minister of Israel, and he's just doing everything he can to expand this. And note, from the last provocation, Elisa, Iran and Hezbollah still haven't retaliated.
Yeah.
Right? So there's actually the countries that we're being told are the crazies are the ones showing restraint, while the democracy in the Middle East run by a criminal that we're supposed to accept its behaviour without question. And this is not to question the existence of Israel, but people need to look at who the Israeli government is right now. They are criminals. They are absolute nutters. They are actual terrorists. Two ministers of that have been charged with terrorism in their own history in Israel by their own authorities. They're actual terrorists, and they are intent on blowing up the world. And we should be withdrawing all our support for Israel while this current government is in charge. Because otherwise, if they draw America into something in the Middle East, it can then get incredibly serious.
Yep. And do go back, if you haven't, and watch the interview that Robbie did with Middle East expert Michelle Steinberg. We can put a link to that below. It'll give you the full picture. But also in the region, two other events. The Houthis from Yemen launched a hypersonic missile which evaded several air defence systems to reach Israel, which will further implicate Iran. And again, this all lends itself to the expansion of war beyond the immediate area.
But in a way that's a real message to Israel, to the Americans, because they don't have a weapon like this. And it got past their air defence systems. We don't know actually where it landed, but it definitely sends a message.
Yes.
Anyway, and we've got to back away from this stuff.
Another factor, which again there's more questions than answers at this stage, is the targeting by, well, Ukraine at least has claimed credit for it, of the largest or a very large ammunition depot west of Moscow. And, you know, Russian bloggers are asking the question if it is possible that this was done by a drone, as Ukraine is claiming, or was it a missile launched, say, from the Baltics? And this raises the question which Putin just warned about last week, that if the West is okaying Ukraine to use long-range missiles to target Russian territory proper, as he said, this means the West is in a direct war with Russia.
It means NATO and Russia are already at war, and because even just providing the guidance for these missiles, and once NATO and Russia are at war, and he's basically saying by all counts they're already at war. This is a much more dangerous precipice for a nuclear war.
Now, The Australian on the 13th of September had an extraordinary editorial headline, "West must deliver in Ukraine." And I'll just quote from it because they say, apprehensions that allowing Ukraine to use long-range cruise missiles to hit targets inside Russia could lead to a major escalation in the conflict, possibly even the deployment of nuclear weapons, are understandable. But no less compelling is the moral case for helping Ukraine. And it went on to add, it is imperative the West loses no time in giving Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky the green light to use the cruise missiles. So, we might risk nuclear war, but too bad. We have to do it because otherwise we'll lose credibility.
Because the way we see the world, it's the moral thing to do. Now, we are the ones who have literally blown up the world for 2 decades. We are the ones drowning in the blood of 1 million people in Iraq, 500,000 people in Libya, 500,000 people in Syria. There's not a war, potential war we don't want to start, and our adversaries haven't done that. Russia has finally gone to war after 30 years of warning that it would be prepared to go to war if NATO didn't back off. It's finally gone to war. We're the trigger-happy ones that always rush into war.
Yeah.
So, but we think we're the moral ones, and this particular paper, the Australian newspaper, Murdoch's paper, the Murdoch media empire campaigned for the Iraq war, campaigned for this world of regime change wars all the time, right? They think they're moral, and in their moral universe, that's the way they define morality. It's the moral thing to do. That even though this could start a nuclear war, it's the moral thing to do.
Yeah.
This is, people, you don't rationalise with this. This is insanity. We should be sending armies of ambulances to the headquarters of News Corp and put them all in white straight jackets and put them in hospital, right? And not let them publish another thing. I mean, this is insanity that is helping to shape the debate on this stuff.
Yeah, now these wars and provocations are essentially about desperate effort to maintain Anglo-American hegemony in the face of the fact that the majority of the world's population across various developing and other nations are withdrawing from their hypocritical rules-based order, their security arrangements and their economic systems and the US dollar-based order because they see it all collapsing and crumbling. And that leads us to a victim of that effort to maintain Anglo-American hegemony, Dan Duggan, with our first topic, Don't Let Washington War Dogs Wreck an Aussie Family. This is very serious because it's not just about Dan and his family, it's about every Australian that is impacted if the Attorney General allows him to be extradited because, as you've been privy to by seeing the submission that the family has and the lawyers have filed with the Attorney General, because it's basically just up to him. So they put forward a very detailed submission, but there are holes in this story which they were able to draw out in a very compelling fashion.
Yeah, so what I have concluded from what I've read is if this case did not involve America and did not involve China, there's no way in a million years the Attorney General would be game to approve this extradition, because it is baseless. The indictment against Dan Duggan is baseless. Now, you might say that, well, that needs to be determined in a court. But on top of that, it's just incredibly sloppy, and we'll go through that. But first of all, let's just focus on what's at stake here. And to do that, we want to play this clip from the end of an interview, just the last 3 minutes of an interview, that Safrine Duggan, Dan Duggan's wife, now she's the reason. I mean, you know, he's from America. He was born in America and served in America, but he became a naturalised Australian because of her, right? Meeting and marrying her. He has a family with her. His life is here in Australia, and so this was a successful couple with a good family, etc. And it's all about to be wrecked, and you'll hear her use that word, because they're being scapegoated because of people in Washington who want a war. And to prepare for war, they want to destroy any business collaboration between the West, or the sort of like, especially the Five Eyes countries, and China. Right? They want to destroy all those links. And so the family made a submission to the Attorney General 3 weeks ago. It comes down to the Attorney General making a decision on this, because there's nothing else that can be done through the courts in Australia. It's got to be the Attorney General's decision. Their lawyer is Bernard Collaery, who is very experienced at this. Bernard Collaery himself was the Attorney General of the ACT when he was in the ACT Parliament. He was the lawyer, remember, for Witness K, and nobody knows who Witness K is, except he was the ISIS agent, Australian Secret Intelligence Service, our version of MI6, who was involved in bugging the East Timor embassy when we were negotiating with them over access to their oil, so we can get, and we did it on behalf of not the Australian government, but Woodside Petroleum, to give them an advantage in these things. So he knew that was wrong, and he blew the whistle on that. And because every blowing of the whistle involves breaking the law, he got charged with that, and Bernard Collaery was his lawyer. But then Christian Porter actually charged Bernard, when he took over from George Brandis as Attorney General, he charged Bernard Collaery as well, right? And this was the epitome of overreach. So anyway, the charges have been dropped on Collaery, but he understands not only just how the Attorney Generals work, but he understands this kind of area of law, right? He's working pro bono. He has produced an excellent submission here for the Attorney General. But it's been 3 weeks, radio silence from the Attorney General. I haven't heard anything. And so on Monday, Safrine Duggan gave a press conference about this, and just to sort of appeal to the Attorney General publicly, please do the right thing. So let's just play the tape. And the part we're going to play, and I want people to take this really seriously, because this family need help. They need our help. We're going to play from when the ABC host asked about what the Americans have done to stop them being able to fund their own legal case. And that's, to me, it just really gets me angry that here's if America thinks it's got right on its side, it's also got all the might and power in the world, right? And if the rule of law means anything, let this man fight his case in court. But what the Americans have done is stop them from selling their own property to fund his legal defence. So they want him in court with his hands tied behind his back, right? And not a level playing field league. And it wouldn't have been a level playing field anyway. Anyway, but listen to Safrine Duggan explain that. And please listen to her voice and take it seriously what this means to this family.
Safrine Duggan is the wife of former US fighter pilot Dan Duggan. We're talking about her request to halt his extradition to the US to face charges there on Radio National Drive. You were prevented, I understand, by a court from selling your family home to help fund your husband's legal costs. So what is your situation financially, if you don't mind me asking at the moment? How have you been able to sustain this fight over the last 2 years?
Well, it's been complicated. We had the house. I had the house as obviously something that I'd worked hard for to be able to use, and we were stopped from selling that. And the money was going to support Dan's legal case. So it's been extremely hard. I don't understand why we've been pushed to such limits. I mean, the US had put that in process here and Australia just ticked it off. We are now basically relying on very generous donations from Australians that are very concerned for my family, myself and Dan, which we thank, amazingly.
And if your husband is extradited to the US, what do you think will happen to him there? What if that plays out? What's your worst fear?
We'll never see him again. My children will not grow up with their father. He's facing 65 years in prison, and at the moment, the US is very volatile. We don't know what will happen.
As for the Australian authorities, I did approach the Attorney General's department, who said that this matter is ongoing and that it would be inappropriate for them to comment. What message do you have for the Attorney General and the Australian government over this case involving your husband?
Please have the strength to make the right decision, to allow my husband to come home. Please talk to our lawyers. We offer up. We have done an extremely detailed, they have done an extremely detailed 89-page document. Please ask upon their help to show you all the efforts that have been gone to that have defunct many of the accusations that are in the indictment itself. So please, before you make a decision like this to wreck an Australian family, to ruin my children's lives, you need to do your due diligence to ask for help that we can show you. We haven't been asked once for anything. Dan's logbook and pilot logbook has proves many things in there about his flying hours that are completely untrue in the indictment. No one's asked for them. So please reach out, make correspondence with us, and we can show you further information.
Well, I really appreciate your time this afternoon. Safreen Duggan, thanks so much for joining me on Drive.
So that's what she said. This family's about to be wrecked by this. There's 6 kids involved. I mean, if he goes to jail, if he goes to America, he will not get a fair trial in this current climate. I mean, I can play you, if we had all the time in the world, Elisa, I could play you the kind of crap that is being said every day in front of the US Congress by congressmen attacking China. Right? And just these people are frothing at the mouth. They are demented. They're so twisted with hatred and rage at China because China, everything they do to China isn't working. They cannot handle a world where China is beating them at anything. They're so twisted. The political climate is all China bashing from one end to the other. Yep. He will not get a fair trial. No one in Washington is going to care that they're destroying an Australian family. Nobody. So there's 6 kids and a wife involved. They can't go move to the United States to be close to that. I mean, how is that going to work, right? Oh, yeah, kids, go and dodge American bullets going to school so you can be close to your dad. Like they'll probably end up having to do it. You know, you just shut it for them. And all because, and it comes down to our Attorney General making the right decision. Yep,
and is he going to have the big US figures looming in his head over that decision? Absolutely, that's going to be the biggest thing in his mind.
Well, he already has, but let's just give people some confidence now in why we are prepared to, although there hasn't been a trial, why we are prepared to support Dan Duggan in this case, right? Because to have an extradition, there's a law involved, and there's a treaty, and there's laws involved, and none of his case qualifies, none of it. So this is the sort of stuff that the Americans have done in the indictment against him. They've tried to make a big deal about because he was a ex-fighter pilot, he did one of these, he became a motivational speaker. Now, a few months ago, I think it was earlier this year, maybe late last year, I was in Canberra, and a friend of our show, Peter Johnson, who I've interviewed here from the Association of Independently Owned Financial Professionals, invited me and Glenn Isherwood to their, they had a drinks thing because they had their conference in Canberra at the same time. And I've addressed their conferences before, but I didn't attend this one, but I was invited to the drinks. Because at that event, Grant Hackett, the 1500 Olympic champion, was brought along as a motivational speaker, right? And so Grant Hackett, I was impressed. He tells us the story about what it took to be a successful Olympian, right? And you know, lots of hard work. I think he said he swam across the Pacific Ocean 4 times in total in training. That's what the equivalent of swimming across, something like that, right? They worked their tail off, and then he's talking about the frame of mind you've got to be in to be this successful, right? And it's impressive stuff. That's what these motivational speakers do. So here's a Top Gun, Dan Duggan. He's got his own version of that, right? About having focus and sharp reflexes and all this kind of thing. And he called it. What did he call it?
The Fighter Pilot's Guide to Mission Success.
The Fighter Pilot's Guide to Mission Success, and it's a motivational speech to people like executives from Toyota and Hewlett-Packard, right? For that, the Americans are saying that motivational speech was him giving away America's secrets. This is the sort of stuff that's in his indictment. The other one is there's an allegation about an aircraft carrier, that he actually trained people in China, fighter pilots in China, to land on a Chinese aircraft carrier. Only one problem. All his movements can be tracked. First of all, the aircraft carrier in question that is named in the indictment was 2,000 kilometres away from where Dan Duggan operated. Second of all, it was 2,000 kilometres away under construction.
Yep.
There was no deck to land on, right? But it's things like this. And you know the worst part about that example? It's not even what he's being charged for. He has specific charges related to his work in South Africa, but the indictment is about those charges, but they pad out the indictment with all this fluff to provide colour, which shows you how desperate they actually are. Now, they also accuse him, and this relates to the money laundering part and conspiracy, that he purchased an aircraft that can be used to train pilots to land on aircraft carriers. Except he didn't. There was such an aircraft at this school that in South Africa, but the South African school purchased it years before he ever started working there, right? He had nothing to do with him. But because the charges relate to international traffic in arms regulations, they're trying to hold him responsible for that as well. Then they're trying to claim they have jurisdiction over Dan Duggan because he's an American, except the charges against him were all alleged to have occurred, the actual charges in the indictment, after January 26, 2012. And what's important about January 26, 2012 is that's the day, down in Tasmania, what's January 26? Australia Day. Do you know what a certain percentage of non-Australians do on January 26 every year? They go and become Australians. And that's the day he became an Australian citizen. And in becoming an Australian citizen, forewent his US citizenship. He was no longer a US citizen. Now, these people are so up themselves that they're actually trying to claim there was something suspicious about that, because why would anyone want to give up their US citizenship? I mean, we're the greatest country in the history of the earth, the universe even, right? How could anyone want it? No, he has an Australian wife, Australian children, Australian business. He was an Australian. This is where his life was. Plus, he didn't want to pay tax in 2 places, right? Now, he has a certificate, Elisa, from the US government of that confirms he renounced his citizenship. He has a certificate. That certificate was issued. He only got possession of it a few years later, and so the Americans are trying to claim that's he still had his citizenship till then. No, the submission that the lawyers have been able to make shows that under American case law, when this certificate is issued, it confirms the loss of citizenship from the time of the naturalisation to the new country, i.e. January 26, 2012. So they don't have a leg to stand on.
Yep.
And while I'm telling you this, you've got to think of yourself as Mark Dreyfus, the Attorney General. He has to weigh all this up, right? And then the final one is dual criminality. And dual criminality is the cornerstone principle of extradition, that you can only be extradited for something that's a crime in both countries. Well, Australia doesn't have international traffic in arms regulations. America does. There is no dual criminality here, and this has been confirmed by a military lawyer, military veteran and international lawyer Glenn Colomites says, quote, Australia has no equivalent to US ITAR laws. meaning the primary allegation against Dan is not a crime in Australia. That's how sloppy the case against Dan Duggan is. The Attorney General has to make a decision on that. And like I said, if it wasn't, us being subservient to America and the fact that my fear is Dreyfus knows that if he gives America what it wants, the only reaction is going to come from the Citizens Party's YouTube channel in Melbourne. The media is not going to care. The politicians are not going to care. And politically, he'll get away with it. And that's what's dangerous.
Yes.
We have to make sure that doesn't happen.
We have to make it a much bigger issue than that. So we do want you to send an email, if you haven't already, to the Attorney General's office and to your local Member of Parliament and senators in your state, raising this issue and just saying, look, you can't do this, you can't extradite this guy, this Australian.
And for now, the most important, if you can do two as a priority, it's to the Attorney General and to your local MP, federal MP, and just send them the same message saying you must not extradite Dan Duggan. This is a travesty of justice, etc. We'll put the contact details below.
And if you can support the Duggan family, they need it. You can go to freedanduggan.org and you can make a donation.
And I have to emphasise that. I mean, they wouldn't have the hat out if the US government hadn't. Well, you heard what Safrine said, right? The US government moved on this, and the Australian authorities just ticked the box. They had a $4.2 million property that they were trying to sell. They had a contract on it, and at the last moment, the day before settlement, it was stopped by the Americans, so they couldn't use that money. And so we've got the link below where you can click on their fundraising, and you look at their fundraising, right? One's nearly, it's like $200,000 in total between them that they've raised from the beginning, but that's gone in lawyers' fees, and that's just the American lawyers, right? That's not the Australian lawyers working pro bono. This is imagine if they could have $4 million to spend on that, right? And they didn't buy a property so they could give it to lawyers. They didn't want that. They did. Unlike, I have to make this point. Unlike, say, Julian Assange and David McBride, those two guys, they consciously did things, the right things, knowing there would be consequences because they were doing it for the right reasons. Daniel Duggan was just going about his business, but because his business involved business in China, and the Americans can, because of his background, can make an example of him. They're about to destroy him. He's no longer an American; he's one of ours. And his family is all ours. They're going to destroy them, and we've got to make sure it doesn't happen. Yeah,
so as we said at the start of the segment, Dan Duggan is a victim of the Anglo-American effort to maintain their hegemony. And the latest vanguard push on that is AUKUS. And we want to quickly mention this because Gareth Evans, former ALP Foreign Minister, has just come out adding his voice to those of other senior Labor statesmen, Paul Keating and Bob Carr, to denounce AUKUS, but in particular what it means in regard to our putting a target on ourselves vis-a-vis China.
And most fundamentally, his most important point was that AUKUS means we're giving up our sovereignty. We're losing our sovereignty. And that's why people have to take this seriously. You can have, if you're a little bit curious, if you're of a certain age where you know Gareth Evans well and Paul Keating well and Bob Carr well, and you might find yourself, well, boy, I didn't like them much back in the day. Why would I find myself in agreement with them? Think of it this way. If we were in a war, if our country was actually at war, every single person in Australia is on the same side. So when we're dealing with these issues that are war adjacent, are about are we going to go to war? Don't be surprised that there's a pretty broad coalition of people that otherwise you might not agree on much who are on the same side. And then when you look at it that way, then you've got to look at these guys. And to be honest, they're quite impressive. Over the days when politicians in Australia could string a sentence together like Paul Keating and Gareth Evans and Bob Carr, all we've got now in Parliament are drones. We've got a politician, we've got a Prime Minister who cannot speak in any other way than being a drone, right?
And sound bites.
And they're scared of their own, they're looking over their shoulder all the time at polls and all this kind of stuff, right? They're scared of their own shadow. These guys weren't like that, if you're old enough to remember. And so they've settled up, and because they are so concerned about our sovereignty. So Gareth Evans wrote in The Australian this week, and The Australian has this great picture of him and Paul Keating and Bob Carr, that AUKUS, quote, will prove one of the worst defence and foreign policy decisions Australia has ever made. He gave 5 reasons for it. One is zero certainty of the timeline of the delivery of the subs. We'd have no certainty when we're going to get them. So, because you've got to think, if our defence is important, and this is the cornerstone of our defence, then what are we going to be naked? So it's zero certainty. 2, they're not actually useful for our defence because only 2 of the 8, quote, are deployable across our vast maritime environment at any one time. 6 of the 8 will always be in some form of repair, right? And even then, they're not made to work off Australia's waters. They're made to work off China's waters, so they're more for attack than defence. 3, he said the eye-watering cost will make it much harder to acquire other capabilities that are more useful for defence, such as state-of-the-art missiles, aircraft and drones. 4, he said the price now being demanded by the United States has become indefensibly high, that's his term. And 5, the exorbitant price will never guarantee absolute protection by our AUKUS partners. And this is a lesson Australia should have learned in World War II, when our whole defence was built around Britain rescuing us, and Britain didn't. And now we've come up with the same thing where supposedly America's going to rescue us. And his point is, under ANZUS, there is no guarantee, and AUKUS hasn't changed it, America has no obligation on it to actually do anything for us, right? And so we're paying through the nose for something there's no guarantee. He said, quote, it is hard to conceive of Australia ever being a target of any kind of Chinese military attack, short of our being sucked into fighting alongside the US in a war not of our making, and manifestly not in our interest. But that prospect is now very real because we have been sucked in. And Craig and I talked last week about the B-2 bombers in Brisbane, right? That are, nuclear bombers. And on the sovereignty question, he wrote, the issue that most troubles me, Keating and Carr in all of this, and which most seems to enrage AUKUS defenders, is what we see as the loss of Australian sovereign independence that's necessarily involved. Are we all just meant to ignore US Under Secretary of State Kurt Campbell's indiscreet observation at the time of the AUKUS announcement that, quote, we have locked them in now for the next 40 years? Locked them in, i.e. Australia can't do anything to get out of this? He goes, I have had personal ministerial experience of being a junior allied partner of the United States in a hot conflict situation, the first Gulf War in 1991, and my recollections are not pretty. All this is not just depressing, but sickening, end quote. Now, and what I found most extraordinary about this, Lisa, just quickly, I met Gareth Evans once in 2016. I was with my colleague Gabrielle Pewitt. There was a conference in ANU in Canberra on Russia, and he was there. And Tony Kevin was there, the former ambassador, and I got to meet Tony Kevin as well, and people like that. But it was funny meeting Gareth Evans because this was a guy, he just had this very big reputation from the days when he was the foreign minister, etc. When I was a kid growing up, right, he was one of the big people in politics. So you always like meeting someone like that. And then he actually remembered who we were, and he confused us with some other organisation, and we sort of said that right. But then I talked about the fact that, this would have been 2016, and I talked about the fact that we actually had worked with Malcolm Fraser in his final years. And his response to that was cynical. Now, Malcolm Fraser, just before he died, had written this book, Dangerous Allies, which was about Australia losing its independence to America and the United Kingdom. That's what it was about. That's what the book was about. And people like Evans didn't go along with that. Evans said to me and Gabby in that conversation, he said, those of us at the time got whiplash watching Malcolm Fraser rush past us to the left. That's what he called it. Malcolm Fraser rushed past it. So that was his analysis of what Fraser stood for. He's now sounding like Malcolm Fraser. Mm-hmm. He's now realised, hang on, our sovereignty is at issue here. Yeah. These are big changes. The backlash has never been bigger. And you can actually see it in the rhetoric of our politicians, such as even Peter Dutton said this week, he said Australia, that he actually wants a constructive relationship with China and he wants trade to grow exponentially. And back on the 11th of June, Dutton said, I'm pro-China and the relationship that we have with them, I want that trading relationship to increase. That's a big shift from him rhetorically, but unfortunately behind that, they're still going ahead with actually the war machine.
Now, you can find more information in the Australian Alert Service. Another way you can help us to keep doing what we're doing and run these campaigns is to actually subscribe to the Australian Alert Service to get it every week. We're now going to talk about in our next topic another article that is detailed in there as well. So that topic is Bail-in's agent bond gets the boot. So we're talking here about after the 2008 global financial crisis, and bailouts were a bit on the nose, and before it had been realised that quantitative easing could go on and on and on indefinitely, QE infinity.
QE to infinity, yep.
A new scheme was devised by speculators called bail-in, which would rescue failing banks by stealing the money of investors, people that held certain types of bonds, and depositors. And what we're talking about in this story today is that particular kind of bond called a hybrid bond or a bail-inable bond that is the first thing to get confiscated in such a crisis where a bank is failing or likely to fail, and regulators like APRA in Australia's case step in and say, okay, we're not going to let this bank fail, we're going to confiscate these bonds. And of course in Europe there's been many cases where they not only confiscated such bonds but a lot of deposits as well.
Now we blew the whistle more than any other organisation. We've blown the whistle on bail-in from the beginning. We've tracked the development and evolution of this policy. And we learned early on that apart from deposits, you have these things called bail-inable bonds. And I remember we came up with this analogy of a racing car with the airbags on the outside, and the airbags are people, right? The racing car is the financial system, and the airbags are the people. And the thing with there was a scandal about bail-inable bonds in Australia that even the head of ASIC, on his way out, this was Greg Medcraft in 2017, on his way out, coward, he actually gave a warning about bail-inable bonds because unlike in the UK, where they weren't allowed to be sold to
they were banned
retail
for sale
investors,
to mum and dads,
in Australia they're all owned by grandmas. And banks like the Commonwealth Bank were giving 8% interest on these bonds. And in those days, with interest rates at rock bottom, right, desperate retirees were snapping these things. Who wouldn't want an 8% interest? They weren't aware of the fine print that, hang on, if there's a crisis, these things are gone.
And I might even be able to find the ads that people were sending us at the time, advertising these bonds, which made them look great.
Yeah. And so if the UK could make sure they weren't going to retail investors, this was Australia really putting ordinary people on the hook for these equivalent of airbags to protect the financial system.
So 53% of these bonds in Australia are owned by retail investors, and APRA called that unusual by global standards. I mean, this is massive.
APRA's understatement.
And of course, Greg Medcraft, as you said, he called them ticking time bombs. And a year earlier than that, because that was 2017 when he said that, in 2016, the then head of APRA, which manages all this risk, Wayne Byers, said that these are not higher yielding substitutes for vanilla fixed interest investments. They are the first lines of defence to aid an orderly resolution. Resolution being the Bank for International Settlements term. BIS manages the whole global bail-in regime. That's their term for a bail-in when, the creditors' money are confiscated by the bank and, absconded and kept to keep the bank afloat, to keep their liquidity there. Anyway, we're saying all this background by way of announcing that on the 10th of September, APRA announced that it was going to phase out these bonds altogether over a 5-year period starting from 2027. So they've got to pay them out over time and so forth. They can't just, liquidate them. And they cited the collapse of Credit Suisse, the European giant, in 2023 when it collapsed. Their hybrid bonds were bailed in. There was a whole back and forth about it, actually. At first they weren't going to do it, and in the end they did it, but it was a massive political struggle and fight over what would be the consequence of this, because this is bigger than any bank it had happened to before, like little Italian or Spanish banks where, or even in Cyprus, where people's deposits were taken or their bonds were and deposits were converted into preferential shares that were worthless and so forth. So what APRA revealed is that in the resolution process of Credit Suisse, the whole process was hampered due to uncertainty around investor reactions, contagion risks, which are related, right? Because if investors start freaking out, they've lost all their money, that's going to only spread the contagion, and broader systemic impacts. So the tool that was supposed to stop contagion and systemic impact, all of a sudden they're admitting could, facilitate and spread that even further. So this is extraordinary. And Jonathan Shapiro, writing in the Australian Financial Review, put it this way. He said, the Credit Suisse collapse made APRA appreciate that hybrid capital was owned largely by retail investors in Australia's case, and if things got so bad, it would be too uncomfortable to impose losses on them. And by acting on hybrid's sacrificial purpose, it would amplify a loss of faith in Australian banks rather than solidifying the system as intended.
Elisa, I got a mental image that this is, if people know with ships you have ballast. Ballast is what keeps the ship stable in the water. So there's water in the belly of the ship, right, to be ballast. This is like ballast that's actually acid. Because the whole thing about bail-in, the whole justification was that financial stability after the GFC was the most important thing, right? So it didn't matter if we were sacrificing grandmas owning bonds. Financial stability came first. The very first time we ever heard about bail-in, associates of ours overseas were at a conference, and one of the speakers was a friend of ours from Japan, Daisuke Kotegawa, who was the former Deputy Director of the Ministry of Finance of Japan. In 2014, we brought him out to Australia to talk about this danger in Parliament. We met with people in Parliament. We had a meeting in Joe Hockey's office about these issues. Daisuke, in that very first speech I ever heard him give, which from back here, but I saw the speech, warned against, his number one warning against bail-in was, you think you're propping up the financial system with this. You are destroying the foundation of the financial system, which is confidence. If people can lose their deposits and their investment bonds to prop up banks, they're not going to have any confidence in the system. He warned that 11 years ago. 11 years later, people have caught up with that reality. And
look, it's the reality of the bail-in regime. Whilst there's lots of rules and every central bank signed up to them, I described it as a skeleton with no meat on the bones, because every time bail-in's been deployed, which I think all cases are in Europe, it was accompanied by bailouts, which it was meant to replace and obviate the need for. Exemptions were granted. The terms of the bail-ins were made up or changed along the way, just arbitrarily by the central banks involved and the regulators. New rules were added to try to force the system to work, like a European Union pre-resolution tool, which stopped people from, when you got wind of a bailout, going and withdrawing all your money before the bail-in, I should say. These kind of things were just added into the mix to try to make it work. Nations from even Australia to New Zealand and India refused to follow or were unable, because of popular opposition, were unable to fully implement bail-in. And so every year the Financial Stability Board at the BIS would come out and say, you've got a bit further to go. This is what you have to do. You have to, and one of the demands on Australia after we implemented bail-in legislation in 2018, within a year the IMF had come out and said, you've got too much government oversight over the process. You have to completely eradicate government oversight for this to work. And part of that is reflected in the RBA reforms legislation of taking away Section 11, which gives the government oversight of the monetary system. But in 2013, and I'll put up this graphic that APRA shows in their report where they released the announcement that this is what they're doing. It was called a More Effective Capital Framework for a Crisis. And so this is part of crisis powers, preparing for a new financial crisis, which they don't kind of emphasise that, but it's implicit in everything that you read in this report, is that they're preparing for a crisis and they have to have these powers. And you can see from this graphic that from 2013, they were saying this is part of their bail-in framework, which in 2013 when we were demanding to know what the Australian government was doing to prepare for bail-in, they emphatically denied.
Yeah, we got no plans for bail-in.
Even though we had seen evidence to suggest in this language that bail-in was in train in Australia, and it was completely denied. But in 2013 to 14, we made a global impact from little old Australia because the G20 conference to entrench the bail-in regime to get all the G20 countries to sign up for it was in Brisbane in November 2014. And ahead of that, we exposed what had happened in Cyprus. We said this is the risk here, this is the danger of doing this. We got popular sentiment turning in that, to recognise that reality. And so, and other countries, that were finding out about this, particularly developing countries, started to say, we're not so sure about this. And so just ahead of the G20 summit, the head of the Financial Stability Board at the BIS, Mark Carney, who was also the head of the Bank of England, he came out, he basically beat a tactical retreat and said, we won't go for the full bail-in package. What we're going to do is sign you all up to these bail-in bonds, these hybrid bonds, because if every bank has those bonds, that can be confiscated at the point of a crisis. But it's those very bonds that APRA has just said they're going to scrap.
Well, good. Unfortunately, though, I'll come back to that. The thing with Carney, by saying why were bail-in bonds a better, more palatable? Because that's bail-in by agreement, supposedly. When you buy the bonds, you're basically signing a contract. Yeah, I accept these will be bailed in. But if the contract's 100 pages long and right at the very bottom in fine print that they were selling to grandmas in Australia, these could be bailed in, but here, take 8% interest, right? The whole thing was actually a scam. The fact that it's taken them 11 years to wise up to something that, that our colleagues were warning about then shows you that these people aren't the geniuses of the world. But Elisa, there's no such thing as a free lunch, because you said just a second ago that implicitly in this whole, why is this an issue now? Implicitly there are rumblings in the financial system that they know they look like they're preparing for another crisis on their hands. And if there is a backing away from bail-in, I suspect that one of the reasons that they feel that they maybe can now, which they didn't when they first devised it, is because of what you've also mentioned, quantitative easing. And we had quantitative easing, which is just straight out money printing to prop up the banks straight after the global financial crisis. And that was just started when bail-in was being devised. But the real test of quantitative easing was in the COVID, right? And that's when this language came about, QE to infinity, right? But because there's no such thing as a free lunch, you might not get your deposits stolen, but they become worthless because of inflation. I mean, it's a catch-22, one way or the other. You've got to clean up this financial system. And by cleaning up, I mean reorganise it, right? And you've got to have, and the best way to reorganise, you want still stability in the financial system, have a national bank that is the real ballast, that is the pole of stability that the other banks can be tethered to, right? And that's what, that's always at the back of our mind when we're talking about our approach to Australia.
And look, we have to do that as a matter of life and death, really, because as the system comes down, this push to have the financiers have control over everything, is a very real danger. In 2013, as bail-in was starting to be used in Europe, JP Morgan wrote a report that they basically admitted, the bottom line was that you need to have fascist type powers to be able to enforce this, to protect the financial system. And they talked about how the southern periphery states of countries in Europe had adopted anti-fascist constitutions after World War II, and that was prohibiting from giving them the power to do what they wanted, to seize control of the banks and save them and so forth. And this is something that's reflected today, which you wrote about in the Alert Service also this week on the Misinformation Disinformation Bill, because when they talk about the harms that can be perpetrated by misinformation and disinformation, the definition of serious harms includes this: imminent harm to the Australian economy, including harm to public confidence in the banking system or financial markets that has 1, significant and far-reaching consequences for the Australian community or a segment of the Australian community, or 2, severe consequences for an individual in Australia.
Now, so when you see language like that, you know, this, first of all, this is already a garbage bill, this misinformation, disinformation bill, and we're going to help to fight it. But they were supposed to have improved it based on public concern. And they've gone and inserted stuff like that, right? That, you can't undermine the confidence in the banking system. And it struck me that 2 senators that, thanks to us, have actually had an experience recently of having to deal with banks, i.e. Matt Canavan, the National Party senator who chaired the inquiry into regional bank closures, and Senator Gerard Rennick, who helped instigate that inquiry. Both of them saw that same clause and they had this reaction. It's worth reading their tweets about this. We'll put them on the screen. Senator Canavan wrote, and trust me, Senator Canavan had a pretty transformative experience chairing this inquiry. He wanted to give the banks benefit of the doubt, but after 13 hearings, he recognised the banks didn't deserve any benefit of the doubt. They deserve all the criticism they get. So he wrote, Australia's proposed misinformation laws protect the banks over the right of Australians to speak freely. If these laws pass, you won't be able to say anything that causes harm to public confidence in the banking system. So under these laws, those who called out the recklessness of the mortgage-backed securities before the global financial crisis would have been censored. Why does the Labor Party think that our banks have earned the right to be immune from criticism? The misinformation laws are to protect them, not you. And Senator Rennick tweeted the same day, this misinformation bill is something else. Fancy trying to censor criticism of the banking system and the financial markets. What's so concerning is how on earth did that clause even get into the bill? Have the private banks and super funds infiltrated the government to such an extent they're now dictating what people can say? Fascism is generally defined as when corporations are more powerful than government, and based on this proposal, it would appear that in Australia that is certainly the case. The banks and super funds are even more powerful than I thought. Governments are clearly no longer interested in serving the people. But there's a reason they insert stuff like that, Elisa, and that's because, as we've been asking now for the last month or so, with people in response to say how determined Jim Chalmers was to get rid of Section 11 of the Reserve Bank Act that gives the government power over the RBA, under orders from the Bank for International Settlements. Now you've got these changes to the bail-in regime, etc. What aren't they telling us about what they're concerned about coming down the pipe with the financial crisis, that they think they need to get these fascist measures in place so they can save the system and bugger the people, bugger the consequences of the people, right? That's what we should be concerned about. We've always had that concern in our mind, which is, like I said before, why we're always pushing for solutions that can right the boat, whatever they do. And the big one is the public bank starting in post offices.
Yeah. Now, stay tuned to this channel and keep an eye on your inbox, because there will be an inquiry into that misinformation, disinformation bill, and we will be asking you to put in your submission, put in your 2 bobs worth, because we have to make a song and a dance about that one. So that's the show for this week. Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks, Elisa.
Thanks for tuning in, and see you again next week.
Authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.